Hi guys, this is Weasel for PokerBrainiacs.com, and we are going to be discussing the concept of preflop steals. What is our objective? It is to look for good spots to take the pot down preflop. And the primary way of doing this is by open raising from the button, the cutoff, or the small blind, hoping to take down the blinds. And the other way we can do this is by 3-bet bluffing versus these same positions. The button, the cutoff, and the small blind. Perhaps these players are also making the same steal attempts, and we can 3-bet bluff against these players, and this is sometimes referred to as a resteal. We are going to also consider some very basic maths behind making steal attempts. First of all, open raising from the button, the cutoff, and the small blind. You can actually steal from anywhere on the table. If the table is sufficiently tight, you can perhaps open raise under the gun in the hope of taking down the blinds. But the standard spots that are considered steal attempts are the button, the cutoff, and the small blind. And these are the positions that tracking software like Holder Manager or Poker Tracker 3 will regard as steal attempts. So when you have the stat attempt to steal, it is referring specifically from open raises from one of these 3 positions. It works best with tight players to act behind you. So if you are open raising quite wide from the button in an attempt to take down the blinds, it's not going to be the best idea if there are 2 very loose players in the blinds, because your steal attempt is just not going to work often enough, and you are going to find yourself playing a hand post-flop with some very marginal holdings. If the blinds are very tight, however, you can theoretically open any 2 cards on the button or in the small blind, and we will go on to look at the maths behind that. And the same goes from the cutoff. You can also open very wide from the cutoff if the button and both blinds are tight. You should probably not be opening quite as wide as the button, but you can still open pretty wide from the cutoff. Sometimes you will be on the button and you will find yourself in a situation where both blinds are ridiculously tight, and you should take advantage of this where possible and begin open raising very wide. And the same goes if you are in the small blind and the big blind is extremely tight. You can do a similar thing. Some other spots to steal, good spots to steal, include times when there are posters or a limper. And if there's a limper, it's not technically an open raise you are making, but they are still very good spots to raise. The posters, their range is often any 2 cards, and if you've already seen them check, their range is then going to be any 2 cards that they didn't think were strong enough for a raise. And as for limpers, perhaps it's sometimes useful to know if they are the kind of players that will limp call or whether they will limp fold. But overall, the extra dead money in the pot supplied by the posters or limpers, it means that your open raise needs to work less often for it to be profitable in the long run. As I said, you can open very wide from the button, and you can potentially open any 2. That doesn't mean you have to. You don't have to open trash hands if you don't want to. For example, you are on the button with the 7 deuce offsuit, you can just fold. Theoretically, you can open this hand if the blinds are sufficiently tight, and you don't even need to c-bet post-flop. It should be profitable just by open raising alone. But if you think by open raising trash hands that you are going to find yourself in some spots post-flop where you are going to make some big mistakes, then it's also fine not to open trash. But it's interesting to know that in some situations it is definitely profitable to open raise trash hands. Let's look at some basic maths. Hero makes a standard 3x open raise from the button. How often does that raise need to work to be profitable? we are assuming hero never c-bets. We just want to know how often the steal needs to work, assuming hero never wins the pot any other way. A very useful formula, and we can hardly even really call it a formula, seeing as it's so simple. The percentage of the total pot invested equals the percentage of equity needed. In this case, we are talking specifically about fold equity, so how often do we need to steal the blinds for it to be profitable? We therefore need to just establish the percentage of the total pot that hero is investing. Hero is investing 3 big blinds, and we know that the big blind is posting a blind and the small blind is posting half a blind. Therefore the total pot is going to be 3 plus 1.5, which gives us a total pot of 4.5, and hero is investing 3 of those 4.5 chips. If we then express that as a fraction, 3 over 4.5, we can then calculate the percentage of the total pot that has been invested. And we do that by dividing 3 by 4.5, and we receive the decimal 0.666 reoccurring. And if we multiply that by 100, that gives us the percentage. And we can see that this open raise 3x blind steal needs to work 67% of the time in order for it to be profitable. Can we then calculate how often each individual blind would need to fold in order for it to be a profitable steal with any 2 cards, even if hero doesn't c-bet? And the way we do that is by taking the square root of the decimal 0.666 reoccurring, and that gives us the value 0.81. So on average the blinds would need to fold 81% of the time each, or 82% if you round up. But how do we know this? In probability, the chance of 2 successive events occurring, i.e. the probability of both blinds folding, can be calculated by multiplying the respective probabilities. If we were to assume that each blind were to fold 82% of the time, we'd calculate the chance of both blinds by folding by multiplying 0.82 times by 0.82, and that would give us 0.6666 reoccurring. And we can just take the inverse function, which is of squaring, which is the square root, to give us 82%. Of course, this would be an average. Perhaps one of the blinds folds slightly more than 82% of the time, one of them folds slightly less. But on average, they would need to fold 82% of the time each in order for it to be a profitable steal. And just to reiterate, this example is assuming that hero never c-bets. And in practice, this is not going to be the case, because even if hero is playing very tight, he is quite likely going to be c-betting for value if he does flop a strong hand, perhaps 2 pair or better. So in actual fact, in order to be profitable overall, the blinds perhaps would not even need to fold as much as 82% in order for it to be profitable for hero to open any 2 cards from the button. Let's talk a little bit about 3-bet resteals, and the logic behind them is you are not the only player making routine steal attempts. So you are raising light from the cutoff, the button and the small blind, but so are a whole bunch of other players. As a result, you can profitably re-steal from the cutoff, button and small blind open raises much of the time. If someone has a high attempt to steal, so according to Holder Manager and Poker Tracker, this would be only including open raises from the cutoff, the button and the small blind. If that stat is high, perhaps maybe an ATS of 40% or so, and that comes along with a high fold to 3-bet, and a high fold to 3-bet is really anything 75% and over. And if they fulfill both of these criteria, they are excellent targets for a resteal or a 3-bet bluff. If their ATS is high, it means that they are open raising very wide from standard steal positions. And as for fold to 3-bet, if they are not folding to 3-bet after they've open raised with trash, then there is going to be less point in bluffing against them. Just some very basic guidelines for 3-bet bluffing. There will be a video on 3-bet bluffing. The sizing should be somewhere between 2.8x and 3x. So if villain open raises to 3 big blinds, perhaps you'd make it 9 big blinds. And the range of hands that you should do it with, in general, they are hands that aren't quite strong enough to call, but still have potential. So there's no need to bluff necessarily with hands like Deuce 7 off, but perhaps a hand like Queen 9 suited with some potential, perhaps some suited aces, some suited kings, some suited 1-gappers which aren't strong enough to call, etc. These are the kind of hands that you want to be 3-bet bluffing with. But this is just a very rough guide, and you should of course use caution when making this play. Again, like open raising as a steal, if you are targeting the right players, then it should be profitable just because you generate enough fold equity. And this does mean that it is profitable a lot of the time, even if you never c-bet, but you should still be cautious. Some people, perhaps they may get carried away and think now that they've 3-bet they might as well begin firing multiple barrels. So if 3-betting light is going to cause you to spew post-flop, then perhaps it's not the greatest idea. So just be cautious that you don't get carried away, and obviously you don't necessarily want to do it too often, otherwise people may cotton on to what you are doing and play back. Let's look at some of the maths behind 3-bet bluffing. And it's pretty much calculated in the same way as we calculated our standard button steal attempts. And in this example, the small blind open raises to 3 big blinds. Hero, who is in the big blind, 3-bets to 9 big blinds. And the question is, how often does it need to work to be profitable? So if you think you've understood the maths involving a steal attempt, feel free to pause the video and see if you can calculate the answer to this question. For a start, let's think about the total pot, because we want to express how much Hero has invested over the total pot as a fraction. The total pot is 12 big blinds. That's the 9 big blinds Hero has 3-bet to, and that's the 3 big blinds that small blind has open raised to. Hero is only investing 8 big blinds, however. 1 big blind was compulsory, and therefore it's not counted in the amount that Hero is investing, because as soon as Hero has paid that big blind, it's become part of the pot, and if Hero doesn't play this hand, he's going to lose that 1 big blind anyway, so it's not factored into how much he is investing. If we express it again as a fraction, and that very simple formula we looked at applies, the percentage of the pot that Hero is investing is the percentage of equity Hero needs, again specifically the percentage of fold equity that Hero needs. Hero is investing 8 out of 12, we express that as a fraction, and that equals 0.6667, and we times that by 100, which is roughly 67%. So this play, in terms of fold equity, needs to work 67% of the time to be profitable. And again, this is if Hero never c-bets, and even if Hero is 3-betting as a bluff, some of the time Hero's bluff hands are going to make 2 pair or better, and Hero is going to be c-betting for value. Therefore, the small blind does not necessarily need to fold 67% of the time for it to be profitable. In fact, he may only need to fold 60% of the time, or perhaps less. What we can see is that in a lot of situations, especially small blind versus big blind, our play may not even need to work that often for it to be profitable. Okay, some final pointers. Some opponents will adjust, and you don't always need to make a steal attempt just because you can. If you suddenly start open raising 100% of buttons, certain players in the blinds are going to adjust and they're going to start calling wider, or they're going to start playing back at you with 3-bets and things. And as such, you might decide to perhaps fold some of the bottom end of your range, just because this way they are not going to catch on as quickly to the fact that you are stealing their blinds. So while it is theoretically possible to open raise a hand like 7 deuce offsuit from the button, or even to 3-bet a hand like that, if you are going to have a range that doesn't open raise from this position, it might as well be the bottom end of your range, such as total trash. So in practice, you might as well fold these hands and then still open pretty wide, but at least things with at least some potential, perhaps suited hands, anything remotely connected, anything with a high card. However, if you think that the player is so tight that he is never adjusting, perhaps he is a multi-tabling nit, then you can disregard the previous advice and literally just open 100% of hands. For example, I've definitely been in spots where the player in my big blind is so tight that it's just made sense to just open 100% of hands, because he's pretty much not going to be adjusting. Even if he knows you are stealing his big blind relentlessly, he may still not adjust because perhaps he's playing a set range, a set strategy, and he's not deviating from that depending on any table dynamics. If you are opening wide, don't use it as an excuse to spew post-flop. Remember that a lot of these plays will be profitable even if you give up immediately post-flop. So if there's no need to c-bet in order to make it profitable, and in actual fact you might be making the hand unprofitable overall by c-betting in a spot where it's a bad spot to c-bet, then there really is no need to c-bet in bad situations. And some people will open the hand pre-flop. The flop won't be so great, but they'll think to themselves, well, I opened pre-flop, there's no point giving up now, I'll fire the flop. And then on the turn they think to themselves, well, I open raised, I fired the flop, I better fire the turn. And they just end up getting in a worse and worse situation. If the steal attempt is going to be profitable in itself and you don't like the flop, just give up the hand. There is no need to c-bet. Also bear in mind that if you are open raising 100% of hands against someone who you suspect to be a total nit, and they do decide to call and to play back at you, proceed with caution. If you know he's not adjusting and he is just sitting there waiting for a strong hand, when he does finally play back at you, he probably just has something very strong like aces or kings, or maybe ace king, and in that case not only is there no need to c-bet, but it's likely that c-betting is going to be unprofitable in a lot of cases because villain is not going to be folding. Also, if you do make some dominated hands, you could end up losing quite a lot of money when villain has made a stronger hand. So when you do finally get called, there's definitely no need to go crazy. Proceed with caution. So I hope this has given you a slightly better idea about some good spots to make pre-flop plays. This has been Weasel for PokerBrainiacs.com. Thanks for watching.